with that. We're going to continue in our 1 Samuel sermon series. And so why don't you go ahead and grab your Bibles and turn there. We're in week 28 of this series. And so if you're new, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. We're not going to be able to rewind a year, basically. We started in January in this series, and we're getting very close to the end. Okay, we're in chapter 27, so if you want to grab your Bible and turn there. Honestly, today is really short comparatively to where we've been looking at like the whole chapter and a half, 45 verses, 50 verses. We've got 12 verses today, okay, 12 verses today. And honestly, and I say honestly, I'm always honest up here. I guess I shouldn't say honestly, because then it kind of you assume that I'm not honest. But today we're going to see a pretty major turn in David's strategy, in his mindset. Do you remember 2 weeks ago when I was up here, David was tempted, right? Tempted to go and chop off a bunch of heads, right, of Nabal and his men. And thankfully someone came in and kind of interceded. Do you remember who she was? Abigail, right? Thankfully, he had an Abigail. Today, there's no Abigail. I mean, she's in the story, but she does not intercede. And we're going to see David make a major turn in philosophy and belief and faith. And it's a sad day, to be honest. It's a sad day as we look at the life of David and the ministry and the kingdom and things like that. David, who's been a solid example of faith and courage, today really takes a major turn here. And so normally at the end of every sermon we say, don't be like Saul, be like David, right? And I'm not going to say that today. And in fact, we're not even going to hear from Saul today at all. So turning your Bibles to 1 Samuel chapter 27. Remember, so far in the story, if you haven't been here, Saul has been chasing David nonstop. Nonstop. David is the new anointed king. Saul doesn't want to give up the kingdom. And so he's trying to kill David. He's doing whatever he can. David has multiple opportunities to kill Saul, and he doesn't because he's God's king. Remember last week, Pastor Bob talked about it, that David and Abishai, I believe, right? They snuck into the camp of Saul when everyone was sleeping, and they're there, and they could have just murdered him right there. And they take his spear and his jug of water, and then they go back on the other side of the valley, and they're like, "Hey, bro, what are you doing, you idiot?" Like they're taunting them. We're going to kind of continue that process, that situation here. So let's start here, verse 20 or verse 1. Let me see. Does this thing work? It's got to be turned on. It's not working. You may have to switch the slides for me. Whoever's up there. There we go. So our title for today is Behind Enemy Lines, okay? Which you're going to figure out really quick why we're saying that. Go ahead and turn to the next slide for me. 1 Samuel chapter 27, verse 1 says, "But David kept thinking to himself, 'Someday Saul's going to get me. The best thing I can do is escape to the Philistines. Then Saul will stop hunting for me in Israelite territory, and I will finally be safe.'" Beginning to get a picture of his mental capacity right now, his attitude. Verse 2, "So David took his 600 men and went over and joined Achish, son of Maoch, the king of Gath." Continuing, "David and his men and their families settled there with Achish at Gath." Now, where's Gath? Do you remember? Who was from Gath? Big guy, right? Goliath, right? And Goliath was a what? He was a Philistine. So David saying, we're going to go live with the Philistines. That's what I'm saying. It's kind of sketchy, to be honest. So David brings his men and their families settled there in Achish at Gath. David brought his 2 wives along with him, Ahinoam from Jezreel and Abigail, there she is again, Nabal's widow from Carmel. Word soon reached Saul that David had fled to Gath, so he stopped hunting for him. So David was right, that Saul stops hunting for David because Saul's afraid of the Philistines, right? These were his enemies. He kept attacking him. He would not win against them. David would win for him against the Philistines, but he was scared. And so David says, I'm going to go hide with the Philistines, which doesn't make a lot of sense, but let's continue. Verse 5. "One day, David said to King Achish, 'If it's all right with you, We would rather live in one of the country towns instead of here in the royal city. So Achish gave him the town of Ziklag, which still belongs to the kings of Judah to this day. And they lived there among the Philistines for a year and 4 months. So let me show you a map here. I don't know if this is going to work or not. I'm trying to, nothing's working. So, there's a red dot, right? Okay, you see that red dot. Let me show you this map here. If you remember, just to give you kind of a context of where all this stuff is happening, remember David was from where? Right, he's from here. And remember they were hiding in the cave at where? Adullam, right? And then, remember he said the Philistines were attacking the people of Keilah, right? God, should we go down and save them? And he does, right? And then it says that they had gone down to Ziph. This was last week, right? That Saul's men were at Ziph, and David's there, and they sneak in, and they get the spear and the jug of water. And so he's starting here, right? This is where our story starts today. And then it says that he heads to where? To Gath. So this is all Israel here. This is all from here down. This is all Israel, Judah area. Now he's heading to Gath, which is Philistine territory. This is enemy territory. David says, it's better for us to go and hide with the enemy, which is kind of crazy. Now, Goliath, we said, was from Gath. Kind of interesting that David would go and hide in the city of the man, the giant, that he just killed, right? Because Goliath has brothers, right, who are big as well. And if you continue to read the Old Testament, you find out that David and his men end up killing many more giants who are very likely related to Goliath. So it's so crazy to me that the pressure on David from Saul is so great that he decides to go and hide with bitter enemies. And he would rather deal with that than deal with Saul. It's interesting, his mental state at this point. He's just getting broke down. But what happens is David's in Gath, and this is the royal city. This is where the king lives. And so because David and his men, 600 men, and it says, and their families, so let's say everyone has, a wife and 2 kids, that's 2,500 people that are now guests of the king, and the king has to feed them and house them, right? And so the king's like, okay, let's get these guys out of here, right? And David says, we'd rather go somewhere else. Can we go somewhere else to a country town? We don't like the big city. How many of you prefer country versus city? Who likes country? Who likes city? You can kind of get both here in Yuma, right? You kind of get a little bit of both. And so it says that they moved down, and we got there yet, down to Ziklag. Now, we're not really sure which one it is here, so this area here. They move on down to Ziklag. And it says, and they lived there with the Philistines for a year and 4 months. 16 months that they're gone in enemy territory. It's kind of interesting. Let's continue. Verse 8. David and his men spent their time. Look at what they spent their time doing. Raiding the Jeshurites and the Girzites and the Amalekites, people who had lived near Shur, toward the land of Egypt since ancient times. David did not leave one person alive in the villages he attacked. He took sheep and goats and cattle and donkeys and camels and clothing before returning home to see King Achish. Let me put the map back up here for you. So it says that he begins to attack the Girzites, the Jeshurites, and the Amalekites. And you know who these people are? These people are allies of the Philistines. These are Israel's enemies. These are the people that David was fighting when he's fighting for Saul. These are his enemies. These are allies of King Achish. And David is acting as a Philistine, killing the allies of the Philistines. This is very, very tricky, this guy. And it's brutal what they're doing. They're killing everyone. No witnesses. No witnesses whatsoever. killing every babies, right? We got babies here. Remember the atrocities we heard of several weeks ago when Saul and Doeg go in and they kill all the priests and their families and their kids and like the sheep, everything, everyone obliterated. They take everything that they can, right? All of the food and the animals and all those things, but they destroy everyone. And there's a reason for that, which we're going to find out here in the next few verses. Continuing in verse 10. Where did you make your raid today? King Achish would ask. And David would reply, against the south of Judah, to the Jerahmeelites and the Kenites. And no one was left alive to come to Gath and tell where he had really been. So David's lying to King Achish. He's lying to him. This happened again and again while he was living among the Philistines. And Achish believed David and thought to himself, by now the people of Israel must hate him bitterly. Now he will have to stay here and serve me forever. Let's look at that map again. So King Achish goes and talks to David constantly. He says, where are you fighting? What battles are you doing? And David's saying, what? He's saying this. He's saying, south of Judah. He's saying that he's actually killing his countrymen, his people. He's telling Achish that he's killing Achish's enemies, right? He's killing these people in Judah, the Jerahmeelites, the Kenites. This is what he's saying he's doing. But really what he's doing is he's killing all of Achish's allies. And Achish believes him. King Achish says, man, this guy's a traitor to the Israelites. He's a Hebrew traitor. He's never going to be able to go home. I've got a pot of gold here with this guy. He's an awesome warrior. He's taking care of my enemies. He's killing his own people. He's going to be stuck with us forever. And the whole while, David is slaughtering people, slaughtering them and lying all about it. And this is what I'm talking about, that David has taken a major turn in attitude, in faithfulness, in obedience to the Lord. He's taken a major turn in strategy here. And there's, I believe, a few reasons for it. King Achish thinks he's got like a pot of gold with this guy. And the reality is he doesn't. And David is being a spy. He's a spy basically at this point. And he's destroying all of Achish's allies so that way Achish is less and less strong. That it weakened the Philistine armies. And that's it. That's our text today. That's it, right? Which is interesting because normally we'd be continuing and continuing and continuing and continuing. And so go ahead and put up the next slide for me. So the question that I always have for you every week is this, right? What stands out to you? What stood out to you in that passage? That looking at this text, and this is, if you're new, this is our time to just kind of talk back and forth. As we read this morning, what do we learn? Like we read the Bible to learn, right? To learn about who God is, about who we are, about how we ought to live our lives. So what do we learn? What stood out to you in this passage? What is David's end goal? It's a good question. Okay. What else? Yeah. Uh-huh. Sure. Okay. Did you hear that? I'm going to say this for the recording. So she said that many times God had the Israelites completely destroy their enemies. And that's kind of what David's doing now. Well, he is doing it right now, even though kind of backdoor, lying about it, hiding it, things like that. That it's interesting that David there is a level of obedience there, but certainly some other disobedience going on there. What else? Good. Normally I have a really long text and we're like, yeah, I know what I'm going to say. Right? Anyone else? Yeah, I got a few. Donna. Being deceitful, yes. Yes, David's helping himself. He's helping the Israelites too, right? Even though they don't know it. Or maybe they don't. There's thought that he would have sent reports back to them, telling them, gaining in popularity. He's playing both sides. He's got this double life, right? Yeah, you had one, Emmy, I think. It's interesting, right? Yeah, like why would King Achish allow David and his men who have destroyed them, right? Time and time again. Why would he allow David in the city? It doesn't make any sense to me. But he obviously thought, man, if I can get this guy, right? If I can just get this guy. Some of you have said this, right? Some of you have said this. You have maybe a competitor in business, right? And you're like, if we could just get them, right? And bring them in, man, we could rule the world, right? Because they're your biggest competition. That's probably what Achish was thinking. And we know that it is, right? Because he's like, man, he'll have to stay with me. We're going to rule the world. It's probably that going on in his head. What else? Does anything else stand out to you? Yeah. He's going to allow somebody who has trampled all over them before to come in, over with expecting arms, and then let him have free run. Never check on him, right? He said it's interesting that Achish would just blindly trust David and never even check on him. Is he really doing what I think he's doing? It's crazy. Yeah. Yes. Yes. That's right. She said that time and time again, David consults the Lord and says, God, should we go do this, right? Should we go and attack? Should we fight? Should we protect them? And here, there's no mention of God whatsoever. There's no mention of David praying whatsoever or asking God anything. That's actually one of my points later. Anyone else? You got a burning? Oh, you're like, oh, I got to say it. All right, well, let me talk to you just really quickly about what stood out to me. And it has to do with David's discouragement, okay? Are we working now? We're still not working? It's okay. David's discouragement. And David here, I mean, we've all been discouraged, right? I mean, if you're alive, you've been discouraged. But David, at this point in his life, is dealing with major discouragement. Let's look at that verse again, verse 1. It says, but David kept thinking to himself, someday Saul's going to get me. The best thing, this is crazy, the best thing I can do, really, bro? The best thing I can do is escape to the Philistines. Then Saul will stop hunting for me in Israelite territory, and I will finally be safe. Now, honestly, this is not the first time that David has thought this. And I did not recognize this last week when Pastor Bob was talking about it. In fact, I didn't recognize it until I was studying for this message this week. And I use Warren Wiersbe's Old Testament commentary. If you're like a Bible nerd like me and you don't have books anymore and you do everything online, that's just fine. But I love Wiersbe's commentary. And Wiersbe brought up a great point. That David had previewed his thoughts last week. And we read them, and I didn't notice them. Maybe you did notice them. But he kind of forecasted what he was already thinking. And let's look at it. It's in verse 20. It's in chapter 26, verse 19 through 20. If you'll hit the slide for me, please. There we go. We covered this last week. And like I said, I was sitting right here, and I didn't notice it. But Wiersbe pointed it out. And I recommend that book for those of you that are Bible freaks like me. Verse 20, verse 19 of chapter 26. And remember, this was right after David and Abishai had stolen the spear and the jug, and they go across the valley, and they're yelling back at Abner and Saul, right? They're yelling back, and they're having this across a valley conversation. And David says to Saul, "But now let my lord the king listen to his servant. If the Lord has stirred you up against me, then let him accept my offering. But if this is simply a human scheme, then may those involved be cursed by the Lord. For they have driven me," listen to this, "for they have driven me from my home, so I can no longer live among the Lord's people. And they have said, 'Go, worship pagan gods.'" And then he asks the question, "Must I die on foreign soil, far from the presence of the Lord?" Like, he's already there, right? Last week, he was already at the point, like, we got to go. This isn't working anymore. And he's losing faith. He's losing courage, which is what it means to be discouraged, right? The word discourage, if you'll hit the next slide for me, is loss of, right? Courage. David is absolutely discouraged at this point. He's lost courage. He's been thinking about this for a while, right? And think about this for a second. Our most valiant warrior king is discouraged? Yeah, he is. The shepherd boy who killed Goliath with a stone is discouraged? Yeah, he is. David, who slaughtered thousands of men in battle, the warrior king, is discouraged? Yeah, he is. He is. It's crazy to me. I read about a story. Is it working now? Let's see. Yeah? No, still not working. That's okay. I read a story about this man who goes to a yard sale, right? And have you ever had a yard sale? We just had one a few weeks ago. I love yard sales. No, I don't. I really hate them. But anyway, he goes to the yard sale, right? And at the yard sales, the devil, right? Devil's having a yard sale. And there's a bunch of tools, and you know men like tools. We love tools, right? And so anytime you see tools at a yard sale, you're thinking, oh, score, right? Score, I'm going to get me some cheap tools. Man walks up, shiny, brand new tools, and he looks down, and he says, there's a tag on it. It says, jealousy, $300. He's like, oh, wow, okay. And then he sees over here, laziness, $600. And then over here, he sees this one, rage, anger, $750. And they're all new tools, and they're shiny, and they're pretty. And then he looks over here to the corner, and he sees this old, rusty, worn-out tool. The price tag on it is $12,000. And the man says to the devil, why is that so expensive? What is it? And the devil says, oh, that's the tool of discouragement, right? It works when nothing else will, and it always gets the job done. Listen, if you're alive today, you've been discouraged, right? You have. And discouragement can come on the heels of incredible loss. Like me and my family are dealing with discouragement based on loss that we've experienced recently. My house was full of tears last night again. And it's going to continue to be probably for a while. But on the flip side of that, you can also experience great discouragement on the heels of great success, can't you? Right? That you can have great success. I was just visiting the Solorzano's brand new home yesterday, right? You can build a home and get married and get a new job and have all these great things and still be incredibly discouraged. That Satan uses this in our lives to bring us down. If you're alive, you've been discouraged. And in the Bible, we have tons of men and women in the Scriptures who were absolutely discouraged, and some of them right after incredible victories of the Lord, and they're completely discouraged. Let me read some of the people. Maybe you've heard of some of these names. Job, you remember Job? Man. Abraham, Moses, Jeremiah, Nehemiah. I mean, think of all of the biblical characters. Samuel even. Samuel, our leader here in this chapter. We're working again, cool. This chapter's leader. Or this book's leader, he's getting discouraged at what's happening in the nation of Israel. We all get discouraged. And so if you're a fill-in-the-blank kind of person, here's where you should get your pens out, because this is what you write down. So I want to talk just quickly about discouragement, what causes it. There are external forces and internal forces, right? There are external forces. Those are your fill-in-the-blanks for you freaks like me that like to write stuff down. There's external forces. Those are things that other people say and do to try to bring you down, okay? Those are external things. Think about this for a second. There are always going to be mean people in your life, and don't point them out if they're in here, right? Like, you know mean people, right? You know people that are jealous of you. You know people, hypothetically, let's say that, and this is strictly hypothetical, but let's say we were playing gaga ball the other night at youth group. Let's just say it was happening, right? And if you don't know what gaga ball is, it's like dodgeball from the knee down, okay? And hypothetically, let's say that I was destroying a lot of junior high boys. Let's just hypothetically say this, right? Just pure, I'm not going to name, this is just think about it. Just picture in your mind. And like, let's hypothetically, I hit a ball really hard at a boy and I get him out, right? And just hypothetically, he says, "You suck," right? No, he sucks, right? The reality is, he's not as good as me at this game, right? Hypothetically. He's not as fast as me. He can't move as quickly as I can. And so what happens, hypothetically, is you get out and you say, "Oh, you're trash," or "You're this," or "You're that," or whatever, because you're jealous, right? Because you're not as fast as or strong as. You can't throw the ball as quick as. And these are all hypothetical situations, of course. But listen, there are always going to be people that are jealous. That you're prettier than them. I never have that problem, by the way. Never once. That you're smarter, faster, that you make more money, that you have your parents still around and they don't, that you've been able to have kids and they can't, things that are completely outside your control many times. That you have a different upbringing, that your parents treated you different. There are going to be people that are jealous of your hard work or just the things that have been given to you. And so what do? They attack. They attack in order to try to bring you down to their level so that way they're competitive, like hypothetically a young boy will, right? Try to take me out with words. So there are those external forces that are there to try to discourage us. And don't point those people out right now, right? But then there are also the internal things that we do to ourselves. Fear, fatigue, things like that. We overwork ourselves so much that we just get discouraged. Or maybe it's just that it's a great thing. Like, I remember having little babies. And man, you love those kids so much, right? But the constant waking up, and I'm sorry if I'm making this really personal for you, Caitlin, but like the constant waking up in the middle of the night to change the 10 millionth diaper that blew out the back. You know those ones, right? And the feeding and the no sleep, and you're just done, right? You love that kid so much, but you just need a break. Can you identify with me, some of you? All right. It's a great, awesome part of life, but sometimes we're just done. We're just tired. Have any of you ever said in the last few weeks, "I'm done," right? I'm just done. And I'm not talking about kids, right? It can be work. It can be your marriage. Like, maybe you're just done fighting. Like, you're tired of putting in the work to communicate with someone that thinks completely opposite of you. And you just say, "I'm just done. Right? I'm just tired. I'm over it." And those are internal things. And some of them are great reasons But we get discouraged, and we all get discouraged. If you are alive, it probably means that you've been discouraged. And maybe some of you, even right now, are right there. Different circumstances, of course. Maybe not babies. Maybe it's work. Maybe it's your marriage. Maybe it's the stinking internet that will not continue to keep your TV, you're over it. The internet has technology sometimes, smashing it. Like we all get to that point. That's where David is at this point, okay? That's where David is. What caused David to be so discouraged? Let's look at David's life. Like we can look at our own, but what caused David to get so discouraged? From the moment he was anointed, trouble started, right? From the moment he was anointed king, the trouble started rolling his way. He defeats Goliath. He does all of this stuff to escape Saul's attacks and plans and schemes. God takes out Nabal for him. You would think that David would be like on such a high from all of the victories, right? But at this point, he's not. The continued deliverance is, yes, awesome, but it's beginning to drain him of his faith, drain him of his courage. A person can only go so long, right, before they become discouraged. David's exhausted. He's faithless. The unending demands of 2,500 some people who need to eat and need to know what we're doing and need to know, like some of you lead a ministry here and you've got 12 people. Like I saw the hub out here and there was like a dozen of you and you're all doing something, and my mom's probably all stressed out now because she's got 12 people asking her these things. Imagine 2,500 people saying, where are we going to eat next? What are we going to do? Or, imagine that. He's stressed out. He's constantly under tension, constantly in danger of being murdered by the person that he loves, Saul, his father-in-law. Imagine that he's on the run. He's found himself into a pit of despair. He's just there. Look at what it says here. Look what he writes. Psalm 13, 1 through 3. Can you read that? It says, O Lord, how long will you forget me? Forever? How long will you look the other way? How long must I struggle with anguish in my soul, with sorrow in my heart every day? How long will my enemy have the upper hand? Turn and answer me, O Lord, my God. Restore the sparkle to my eyes, or I will die. You see, clouds of darkness and doom, they're going to come. They are going to come. And there's nothing, honestly, there's nothing ethically or spiritually or morally wrong when those things come. It is our response to them, right, that we need to be aware of, that we need to keep in check. And David here, so far in this story, so far in this narrative, every time there's been darkness on the horizon, which has been many times, just like Terry said, he's gone to the Lord. He's asked for wisdom. He's trusted in the Lord. And today, he's running. He's taking things into his own hands. And he's taken off. He's begun this kind of downward spiral that we're going to look at into fleeing. I mean, he's just running away. He's fleeing from the covering of the Lord. He's disobeying what God had told him to do. And so if you're a note taker, I've got 10 fill-in-the-blanks for you, and we're going to move through them really quick. And the first thing that I want to talk about is this: David's just tripping, right? And if you don't know what tripping is, it means he's going crazy, okay? That David's tripping. He's not who he normally is. He's just kind of out of it. And I see 5 kind of indicators, okay, that he's tripping. There are 5 things that we can see pretty much all in verse 1 right there. Let's look at verse 1 again. It says, but David kept thinking to himself. There's a problem right there. Someday, Saul's going to get me. The best thing, I want to underline, the best thing I can do is escape to the Philistines. Then Saul will stop hunting for me in Israelite territory, and I will finally be safe. He's tripping. He's delusional, right? So here's one of the things, okay, one of the indicators that he's tripping. He's thinking of things in a human way. There's humanistic thinking going on here. Humanistic thinking. That's your number one on all those lines that I gave you, and I know some of you are loving it and others of you don't care, right? And it says, but David kept thinking to himself. That's the problem. Okay? That's the problem. That we can talk to ourselves, but that is quite different from talking to God, like what Terry had just mentioned. It's quite different. Thinking to ourselves is not prayer. If you think about something and you're worrying about something, that is not prayer. Okay? It just isn't. And David took his advice horizontally, presumably to his men and the people around him, but this time did not take it vertically. There's not one mention of prayer in verse 27. Number 2 is pessimistic reasoning. We see pessimism here. That David's talking to himself, and what he's saying to himself is very negative. Okay? What does he say? Someday Saul's going to get me. How does he know that? David has protected him, or God has protected David time and time and time again. And God has anointed David as king, and so he knows he's going to be king. And David's saying to himself, Saul's going to get me. Saul's going to... It's pessimism is what it is. Matthew 6:34. We don't know, right? So don't worry about tomorrow. For tomorrow will bring its own worries. Today's trouble is enough for today. No one knows the future. Nobody knows the future. And going negative about something immediately can very quickly lower us into a pit of self-despair. Number 3, forgotten promises. David forgets about what God has promised him. We tend to do that too. We forget that God's promises are renewed every morning. Look at Lamentations. We don't many times read verses from there, but look at this. Lamentations 3, verse 22. The faithful love of the Lord never ends. His mercies never cease. Great is his faithfulness. His mercies begin afresh each morning. I say to myself, the Lord is my inheritance. Therefore, I will hope in him. You see, David has forgotten what Samuel had said of him. David has forgotten. Do you remember what Abigail had said of Abigail? He's dealing with Abigail, and she's like, no, you're the next king. Everyone in the country knows it. We all know it. He's forgotten what Jonathan said about him, that I know you will be king. He's even forgotten. Remember, Saul, even a few weeks ago, said, I realize that I'm looking at my replacement. That David has forgotten the promises of God. And David says, I'm going to perish. Saul will kill me. I have to save myself. And we become negative and pessimistic when we keep our eyes on the current situation only and not what God has promised on the backside of those things. Number 4 is irrational choices. Look at his choice. His conclusion after talking to himself is just kind of silly, right? The best thing I can do is head to enemy territory, to Philistine territory? Really? I mean, oh boy, ain't right, if you ask me. I mean, he's just not. God has protected him time and time and time and time and time again in Israel, and he says, it's time for me to go to the enemy. It just doesn't make any sense to me. What's scary to me here is that God allows him to go, right? That God allows him to go. And God's going to allow you to go. When you decide to step away from the promises of God, the plans of God, the plans that God has for you, when you say, God, I'm going to step away from those, and I'm going to begin to form my own plan. But the God of the universe that loves you, he lets you do that. And that's a scary thing. Because, first of all, he doesn't want robots, right? He wants people that choose to follow him, that choose to love him. And David chooses to walk away from God's plan for him here. If you want to forget about God and run your own life, God's going to let you do that. That's the scary thing. It's absolutely fearing. Number 5, the last one here. Others affected. Others affected. There are others that are affected by David's choice, aren't there? I mean, there are tons of others. And many times we invite others to join us in our disobedience. Look at what it says here in 1 Samuel 27, verse 2 and 3. So David took 600 men, and he went over and joined Achish, son of Maoch, the king of Gath. David and his men and their families settled there with Achish at Gath. So he says about 2,500 people probably. If you got a big family, it's even more. But David brings 2,500 other people into his disobedience, into enemy territory. Unfortunately, when we begin to live a life of disobedience, when we take ourselves away from the Lord's plan and begin to live our own plan, you know who many times pays the price? Is the ones we love the most, right? The ones we love the most many times are the ones that are most affected by our decisions. And so all of these things cause a downward dive for David, okay? And that's your next 5. They cause, what is his mental state at this point? What does it cause? It causes some things. Number 1, false security. I'm going to go back. False security. David says to himself, I'm going to leave Israel and finally be safe. Like for some, maybe living in enemy territory outside of God's will, you feel safer because there's no pressure anymore to do the things that God wants you to do. But are you safe? No, you're not safe. You're absolutely not safe. And David wasn't safe either. David's problems didn't drive him there. He chose to run. Number 2, wrong allegiances. A disobedient lifestyle is just having wrong priorities and wrong allegiances. David allied himself and his men with the enemy, with a Philistine king, and David would eventually say, I'm a servant of King Achish. This is our warrior king who loves God with all his heart, and he's calling himself a servant of King Achish, the enemy. Pagans. It's so crazy to me, the allegiances that we can form when we're out of the Lord's will. Maybe for you, your heart says, I'm a Christian, but your actions don't really say it. This was the example of David. Number 3, continued compromise. What do all of these things form in us? They form continued compromise. David is in Ziklag for 16 months. Okay, this was not a one-night stay. And many times for us, when we choose to step away from God's plan for us, it's not a one-night stay, is it? It's many, many months and years, and so many people that we know that say, man, I'm just going to give church a break just a little bit. I just need a break. Man, they never come back. They never come back. And that's a horrible, horrible tragedy. And then number 4, double life. He has to lead a double life. Duplicity, a double life, is pretending to be one thing, but you're not really. That's really not what you are. David's an Israelite, but he's acting like a Philistine. And listen, I know this life all too well. For those of you that know my story, the first 25 years of my life was like David. Saying I'm one thing and really living another way. Saying I was a Christian, having the t-shirt, knowing all the things, but really I was just dead. Following my own life, my own path. And it's no way to live. It's no way for us to live. It was no way for me to live. And then the last one is it causes him to live in lies and deceit. He tells the king, I'm fighting the people south of Judah. Well, there's a lot of stuff south of Judah. The whole continent of Africa is south of Judah, right? He's being vague. And he's lying and he's deceitful. And when we begin to come out of God's plan for us and live this double life, you're constantly lying and covering up and doing what you can when you're trying to tell one person one thing and one person another. It is a horrible life to live. Trust me, I did it for way too long. And this is where we find David. He's in enemy territory. He's lying constantly. He's vague about what he does. He's covering up everything. He's living in secrecy, running from accountability. This is where we find our hero today. And it's heartbreaking. It's an interesting turn, for sure. It's an interesting turn for David. And I don't like it. I did not like having to prepare this message today. Because so far, David has been such a great example, right, of how to live and what to do. And even a few weeks ago when he was tempted to start chopping off heads of Nabal and his men, right, he's got Abigail and she comes in and she kind of rescues him and he does the right thing. And this time he's failing. And it's no fun. But it is a reminder, right, that none of us, right, are beyond the temptation to step away from the Lord's plan for us. And he does. And we know that eventually he gets on the right path with God, and he's got everything situated, and he's a man after God's own heart. We know the end of the story, and so it's okay. But I want for us this morning to think about the discouragement that David was dealing with. And what did it cause him? Worship team, you guys can come forward. What did it cause him? What did it cause the people that were around him? And yes, you're going to be discouraged. It's coming if you're alive. It's coming. And there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing spiritually or morally, ethically, nothing wrong with getting discouraged. We're all going to get discouraged. But what do we do with it? How do we respond to it? Do we trust the Lord? Do we trust His promises for us? Are we faithful in those moments? Or do we say to God, I've kind of had enough of that. I'm going to try and do it on my own. And when that happens, we see circumstances like David, and things start to fall apart. And I bet you can think of in your brain many examples of those, maybe even in your own life, where you walked away from the Lord. I pray that you haven't. But don't be like David this time, okay? I know I say it pretty much every week. Let's be like David. Don't be like David this week, okay? Don't be like David. Stay the course. Trust the Lord. Rely on His promises for us. Let's pray.